welcome to Furious Driving, and today I'm at the wheel of one of the quirkiest and most unusual cars you've ever seen. Heavy on the quirk, light on the features. Yeah, this is a 1968 DAF 55 Coupe, complete with Vario-matic. This car is currently for sale at Stone Cold Classics, so check out their website for more information. Right, let's have a quick word from our sponsors and then get on with the review. Furious Driving, proud to be supported by Bidding Classics, the online classic car marketplace with more cars added every week. Diamond Bright, protecting, cleaning and caring for the Furious fleet and for yours with 10% off using code FD10. And Lancaster Insurance cover the Furious fleet. They are one of the biggest specialist insurers in the UK, covering all areas of vintage to modern classic cars and motorbikes. Follow the links in the description below. Hello and welcome to Furious Driving, and this little Dutch nugget of joy is the absolute pinnacle of weirdness that we live for on this channel. This is a 1968 DAF 55 Coupe. And I've said this many times before, but when did you last see one of these? Probably never. And this is a really unusual little rarity. It came from the continent, it lived most of its life in the south of France, and so it's an original one-owner rust-free car. It is immaculate and it is wonderful. So I hear you ask, what is a DAF 55? Well, this obviously is a DAF 55. It came out in December 1967 as a saloon. Almost a year later, in September 1968, they released an estate version. But halfway in between, in March 1968, there was this, the Coupe, which is arguably the prettiest of the bunch. And that was quite a pretty bunch to start with, because the styling came from none other than Micheletti himself when he designed the DAF 44. You can see where this progression is going, can't you? It only ran for 2 years. There are a lot of similarities, but this is quite a big development, which I'll run you through in a second. They wanted something a bit faster, a bit more refined, and that's what the 55 was. So the styling is pure Micheletti genius. There's lots of little details you wouldn't necessarily notice at first glance. For example, the bonnet is actually a clamshell, like on a Range Rover, which follows around here. And the lip of it is a square edge, which flows into the front and down the front of the bonnet. It's a lovely design. The front end had been redesigned to allow more airflow for the engine on the 55 over the 44. The Coupe became that most exciting of things, frameless doors, which is very exciting and very glamorous. However, you do need to be aware that if your windows are down, you do have the possibility of taking out a nostril or an eyeball on this quarter light post, because it's quite pointy. So, or if you do happen to be driving one of these, important safety notice there, big PSA. Moving down the car, we've got an interesting reverse swage line. Instead of a line sticking out, we've got a line sticking in with a crease down the length of the car from that bonnet shut line, and that's where the door handle sits, with the separate buttons of the door handle. And you'll notice two other things on this car. The wheels. This car is wearing mini lights, and that's sort of historically correct because the competition cars of these did actually have mini lights on them, but they're only a 3-stud. So Mini Light had to manufacture proper 3-stud Mini Light wheels for DAF back in the competition days, and when the owner wanted to put competition style Mini Lights on here, he contacted Mini Light and they made him a new set from the original plans, which is quite cool. Secondly, you'll notice there's no fuel filler. That's because it's around the back. Now there is some quite lovely badgering going on around the back of the car. We've got our 55 Marathon plaque on the back because that's the exact model of the car. We've got our DAF logo for the Daffodil brand. We've got our Wilkins Den Dolder badge because this car came from a Dutch dealership owned by the dealer principal who owned the garage itself back in the day. And finally, we've got this Vario-matic badge on the back, which we'll come to in a second. But the reason I brought you around here is for this, because in the style of American cars of the 60s, the fuel filler is behind the rear license plate. Keep those lines clean. Now, lifting the bonnet on this car is slightly unorthodox because instead of having a sprung-loaded catch to pull to release the bonnet, there are a pair, 2 of them, metal levers you have to pull down to release the latches, then you can lift it up the wrong way. So everything's a bit bum about face on this particular car. One thing that's particularly orthodox for such an unorthodox vehicle is this engine. Aficionados of such things will have already spotted it to be a Renault Clion family engine, a development of the unit from the Renault 8, because at the end of DAF 44 production, It was realised that the little boxer engine in the 44 really was at the end of its life. There was no more to be gained from that particular thing, and DAF, not having enough money to develop a new engine, went into a partnership with Renault to develop this engine here, 1108cc, 1.1 litres, 50 horsepower of Fury, single carburetor, 4-cylinder, inline, water-cooled, no less. So very, very orthodox indeed. I'm also noting while I'm down here this kind of bathtub architecture of the metalwork inside here, and also the fact it's got a strut brace because rally car. Right, set quirkiness to stun, we're going inside. As I say, we've got these separate handle and button, a very mid-1960s style, I guess you might call it. And inside the car we've got a beautiful mix of tan and wood and black, because this is the Coupe, this is the most upmarket of all the cars. The door card itself, a black leather textured vinyl with a weave like in a 911 kind of vinyl, more black underneath, separated by metal trim pieces, a nice door pull which feels quite solid, a little tiny door handle, and a very, very tiny indeed window winder as well for this main window, obviously static, pointy and dangerous quarter light. Inside the car itself we've got more of that delicious 911 spec woven pattern vinyl, but we've also got this Alcantara-like material. Feels like it could even be genuine suede, and the way it's worn I suspect it might be. Climbing inside, being careful of this thing as we get aboard, we have got, obviously it's a left-hand drive car coming from Europe. Quite a compact cabin, and you'll notice immediately how much footwell intrusion there is from the front wheel well. And of course, only 2 pedals. And this is the thing I'm going to jump straight to, because this is a really big part of this car and really what DAF is most famous for. This little funny shifter here is the Variomatic, because underneath there is a CVT gearbox. These cars were only available with a CVT. There was no regular automatic option, there was no manual option even, only the CVT. And if you're not sure what a CVT is, it's continuously variable transmission. It's a bunch of rubber bands doing their things on a pair of interlocking cones that rotate and do weird wizardry underneath, which means the car generally doesn't rev very high and the transmission should be delivering power seamlessly at all speeds. It was considered quite a luxurious option for such a small car back at the time. That was by people who were selling it. Everyone else thought it was a bit weird and a bit slow. But it is a genuine curiosity. So stumbling back to the dashboard, there is no T-shelf. It's pure 45-degree slope, so no chance of putting a tea or a coffee or an espresso or anything on there. We do have the addition of, I'm guessing that's for the fog lights on the front, that's definitely later. We've got little tiny weeny air vents in the corners, which you can rotate and turn off and on just merely by closing them. You'll notice we've got this rather cool twin dial pod on top of the dashboard. This third dial for the RPM, this is an aftermarket thing the previous owner actually installed. But on the left hand side we've got fuel gauge, temperature gauge, warning lights for electricity and oil, and on the right hand side we've got our speedometer going up to 160 kilometers per hour. This is a nice little upgrade on the Coupe over the standard cars, which got a far more ordinary binnacle here in the centre. Another upgrade that the Coupe's got was this lovely wooden dashboard insert on the glove box over there. Actually a little panel over here as well, which looks like it pops down. Yes, it does. We've got a little tiny knee size glove box on the driver's side. We've got a full size glove box on the right hand side, all covered in this delicious faux wood vinyl stuff. In the centre we have got 4-hole controls. We've got our windscreen washers, our windscreen wipers, our lights, and most of them to do with the gearbox, actually, looking at the picture of the bands on there. In the centre of that we've got our heating and ventilation, and the one bit of dashboard illumination is a red LED, or possibly light bulb, and we've got our hazard warning lights as an aftermarket addition down here. And those wipers are 2-speed. Cool, huh? On the left hand side we have got our choke. We can probably push that in now because it's quite warm, and the steering wheel is clearly an aftermarket item, like a really cool sporting thing. Now looking back, despite being a coupe with a fairly shallow roofline, it's actually got quite a lot of headroom back here. We have got seat belts for the front anchored in the back, but no seat belts, you'll notice, in the back. So a quick sit back there to get a feel of it. Alright, climbing into the back of the car. Front seat swivels forward. In we get. back seat does feel a lot more vinyl-y, and it's actually deceptively high. The front seat is very low indeed. I'm not sure if the passenger driver's one, I think the driver's one might actually have been altered slightly to be even lower than the passenger one, but I thought there's going to be a fair degree of room in here. But no, this turns out to be an absolute honest-to-goodness 2+2. There is little in the way of headroom at all. This is a kids-only back seat, and kids you don't like much, as there's no seatbelts. Right, so let's take the DAF for a quick drive. Now, once again, things are a little on the unorthodox side, because what you have to do is make sure you start with the handbrake on, the Varimatic gearbox or drive system transmission in gear, in forwards, or reverse if you're running it backwards. Turn the engine on, handbrake off, foot off the brake. The car doesn't really go anywhere until you start giving it a little bit of throttle, and then it just moves away. And off we go. And you can actually feel quite a bit of poke from the back end of the car, and it's a very strange experience. It's like a very loud, high revving automatic. We're doing 60 kilometers per hour, or just under in fact, and 4,000 RPM. And it does feel like a little rally car. I think this car has been just breathed on a touch to make it a touch more, rally-centric, if you like. It's interesting how the gearbox has changed the nature of the Renault engine, so it feels like a high-revving Italian thing now, which is helped by the Micheletti Italian styling. Well, the brakes are good. You might have noticed the big master cylinder under the bonnet. It's actually got dual circuit brakes under there. And it's got discs at the front and drums at the back. This is an upgrade from the previous 44, which had drums all round. Wow, I am in the back of Beyond down here, aren't I? One thing I forgot to mention when the first start off is this mad seat belt, which is kind of curious. Now setting off again, handbrake on, into gear, start the car, foot on brake, handbrake off, foot off brake, and away we go. Hopefully on a slightly better road this time. That's going to be a bit bumpy before. So yeah, the 55 was a development of the 44, as I previously said. But that means at the front, it now got longitudinal torsion bar suspension, which gave it front independent suspension. And at the back, it had a rear swing axle. Well, it still has, I imagine. Now, this coupe is a stunning looking thing, and it made pretty good sales numbers for the company. About 1 in 8 of all 164,000 55s that were built were actually coupes. Everyone loves a pillarless door. That's why they gave us these lovely frameless windows. Unfortunately, there was a bit of an issue with wind noise in some cars, so during production the car got facelifted about midway through. It gained rather ordinary, boring framed windows at that point. I've got to say the brakes are surprisingly powerful for a mid-60s car. They really do grab well. Really has got right hand indicator, surprisingly good pickup. It kind of feels like a front engined Imp in many ways. It doesn't look that far off it either. Aiding that impressive handling, which does make it something of an unknown rival for things like the Imp and the Mini, is partly the rack and pinion steering, but also the location of the Boeing drive gearbox. It's in the back of the car, giving excellent weight distribution, and it has an aluminium prop shaft running front to back with 2 rubber torsion dampers keeping things smooth. In terms of performance, DAF claimed a top speed of 87 miles an hour, that's 140 kilometers an hour, and able to climb gradients above 30 degrees. However, the brochure makes no mention of 0 to 60, so we can assume it's not something particularly impressive they wanted to boast about. However, they do make a point of noting that maintenance is restricted to just oil changes. There's no lubrication points in this car, something that was still a thing in the 1960s. It is a lot of fun to bimble about in. It's weird though, because the engine is just constantly revving really high. I feel like at this kind of speed, I'm doing about 40 miles an hour, the engine should be settling down to about sort of 2,500, 3,000 RPM. It's still above 3. You might be wondering what became of the DAF company. They first started building cars in 1958. The first one was called the 600. And they, of course, were absorbed into Volvo in the mid-1970s. That's when the owner of this car, who'd been a DAF dealer, decided to quit the game because he didn't want to be part of Volvo. And DAF as a car company kind of ceased to exist at that point, with their last ever production model being what became the Volvo 300 series. But DAF is still around in a different form. They make medium to heavy HGVs and trucks. Still going strong today. And this is, yeah, quite a curious driving experience. It's a little bit like an Imp. It feels like there's not really any weight over the front wheels, even though the engine is in the front. The suspension is pretty well dialed in, so it does have quite a surprisingly firm ride. I wonder if it's been slightly doctored by the last owner just to give it a bit more of a sporting stance. But it really does feel like you're very, very connected. The wheel, there's no power steering, so the wheel is absolutely 100% glued to the front wheels, doing exactly what your bidding is. And it turns in and grips really very well indeed. And even though it's got the lower roofline, it does have amazingly good visibility. Typically 1960s pencil-thin AVC posts, so you really don't want to be rolling the thing.
The brochure is at pains to point out that the Coupe has just as much leg and elbow room as the saloon version, with its 7'4" and 5/8" inch wheelbase and a wide track of 4'2" in the front and 5'1" in the rear. Cleverly, they don't mention anything about headroom in the back, because that is clearly not as good as any of the other models.
But you can see all the way out of it absolutely fine. As a practical coupe goes, it's surprisingly good. The boot is really very commodious. They made a big deal of that in the brochures, talking about how much stuff you could fit in the boot. If this car didn't have the strut brace fitted onto it, the spare wheel would be in the front.
But as BMW and Alfa and others have found when they've done a rear-mounted gearbox or a transaxle, boot space is slightly compromised by having a higher floor. Although DAF did still make a point of it being quite commodious.
I suspect at this point I'm going to be wanting to overtake this Golf around this roundabout. Yeah, let's take a second loop of the roundabout, because this feels like it can do a bit more. Yes, it really can. It's got some grip to it. This is amazing. Wow, I'm falling out of the chair and the car's not losing grip. It does sound a lot faster than it actually is. This is always the problem with Variomatics. The engine is shouting away, but not a lot's actually happening. But it is an awful lot of fun. If you're looking for something a bit weird and unusual to add to your collection, you cannot do better than this. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed this ride out in this absolutely barking mad rarity. I mean, there can't be many of these on the road in the UK. I hope you've enjoyed having a look around it. If you have, please hit like and subscribe, and join us again next time driving something completely different. And don't forget to like and subscribe, that matters.